Welcome back to FRAC for our next session. And we will be joined by our speakers in just a second. First, I wanted to remind everyone that this is being recorded and that you will receive a copy of the recording after the end of the conference, along with the handouts. So that, and I'm sharing my screen. Robert, Julie, Tricia, do you want to share your own screen, or do you want me to do the PowerPoint for you?
You can continue to do the PowerPoint.
Okay. All right. That's
Thanks.
what I'll do then.
We'll just go beep old school when we're ready for the next slide.
That will be perfect. That will be
Okay.
perfect. All right. Well, let me go ahead with the introductions then. It is my extreme pleasure to introduce another of my dear friends, Julie Cole. Julie Cole is the Director of Compliance and Monitoring, Compliance Monitoring and Strategic Initiatives at East Carolina University in Greenville, North Carolina. CMSI is a new unit that recognizes ECU's significant growth in sponsored programs over the past 3 years. CMSI provides university-wide financial compliance monitoring, works with other ECU units to develop solutions and resources for streamlined project management, and oversees mandatory training for department and decentralized research administrators. Julie has directed multiple pre-post award offices throughout her career, most recently retired from Duke University, where she led a unit similar to her current CMSI duties. With more than 25 years of experience in research administration, Julie has a long-standing commitment to training and professional development for research administrators and is a frequent presenter and workshop faculty for NCURA. She is a past president of the Society of Research Administrators International and a longtime member of NCURA. Julie received her master's degree in administration of higher education from Appalachian State University. And what was not included in the bio was another important contribution, Julie, I think that should be mentioned, is that you were one of the catalysts that brought about the body of knowledge which informs the Research Administration Certification Council and is used for the CRA, the CRA pre-award and the CRA for financial. And had you not done that, I'm not sure that those programs could have come into existence. So your work benefits all of research administration, and we are very appreciative for what you've done there. Robert Holm is the Associate Director of the Office of Proposal Services and Faculty Support at Auburn University in Auburn, Alabama. Before this position, he was the Director of the Institute for Research and Scholarship at Butler University in Indianapolis, Indiana. He received his bachelor's degree in biology from the University of Miami and received his master's and doctoral degrees in biological sciences from Northwestern University. Bob has more than 20 years of experience in research administration and over 25 years of experience in the environmental management field. Prior to his tenure at Auburn and Butler, he was administrator of the Environmental Resources Management Division for the city of Indianapolis. He has also served as manager of environmental programs for the city of St. Petersburg, Florida, and manager of the coastal and wetlands section of the Metro-Dade County for Metro-Dade County, Florida. Building on that experience, he is an adjunct faculty at Auburn University teaching courses in environmental science and environmental regulations. He has presented at NCURA regional conferences and the SENCER Summer Institutes. And I also have the pleasure of introducing Tricia Callahan. Tricia Callahan is the Senior Research Education and Information Officer at Colorado State University. A longstanding member of NCURA, Tricia shares her experiences through volunteerism and presenting. A graduate of the Executive Leadership Program, Tricia currently serves on the Professional Development Committee for NCURA, peer review, nominations and leadership, traveling faculty for the Fundamentals and Sponsored Projects program. Tricia can be described as indefatigable. She just never seems to tire out. She's always presenting and doing something to share her time and talents, and is very much appreciated. So now with that, I would like to invite you to present your session and tell me when to move to the next slide.
Okay, we'll go ahead and move to the next slide and let Bob kick things off for us. Thanks, Jennifer.
Well, good afternoon. Those are some very lengthy bios and very impressive. Julie, I didn't know you were, as somebody put it, research administration royalty. That's pretty good. We're here to discuss a project that the three of us have undertaken at NCURA, and that is to put together a compendium of training programs across the country that would be available to whomever wants to avail themselves of this compendium in the event that they're either developing a new training program or they're looking to revise their existing program. And as I started working on this and started working on the training program here at Auburn, one of the things I came across were three pretty much widely accepted traits for training, and that is training programs equipped an organization with competitive advantage and countless benefits. Three main benefits are personal, career, and employee development. And then training improves organizational performance, decreases turnover, and enhances the workplace environment. So I came across these traits, these positive attributes of training, and then I realized now I have to figure out how I'm going to put together a training program here at Auburn University. And that involved quite a bit of legwork and conversations with various people in NCURA and outside of NCURA, at SRA, for example. And after I went through all of this a few years ago, I started thinking about, well, why can't we put a book together that would have the existing training programs in the country, that people that are trying to do something with their training program or establish a new one, they could go to this book and say, oh, there's a person that I really need to talk to, and find out where they're located, what their program entails, and then go ahead and call them or contact them in some way, so that they would have an opportunity to see what they went through and then what type of a program they had. So that was the thought process that I brought to Julie and to Tricia, and they said, good idea. And then our next step was to, in the latter part of last year, to develop a survey that we sent out, and we've gotten really good results, and we've reactivated the survey link for the attendees at FRAC, that you can go ahead and access this link as well. And we would certainly welcome your input into the program and into the compendium. That's pretty much an overview of what we started out with and what we have found in terms of responses. And then Tricia is going to kind of look at the analytical side of the program, the results we have received so far. And again, I welcome you to participate through the link and add your university, college to the resources that we are starting to compile. I think we're going to have plenty of time for discussion, and that's why we've only limited to about 4 or 5 slides. And I'm going to turn it over to Tricia to take it into the next step.
Great. Thanks so much, Bob. I'm going to chime in. When I first came to Colorado State University in the training role, my boss at the time, Diane Barrett, said, you need to talk to Julie Cole. So as we started trying to develop our program at Colorado State, we had an early discussion with Julie and what she had developed at Duke. Then I started meeting other trainers around the country, and started researching online who had training programs that, were transparent. I could look at not necessarily their content, but at least their outline, what areas were they really focusing on? How did they go about, were they surveying, getting needs from their institution? How were they getting buy-in at their institution? Researching all of that. And we're seeing more and more training programs pop up. I would have said prior to the survey, there were maybe a couple dozen or so. And then we did the survey and we had 63 respondents. So Jennifer, if we could move to the next slide, please, and show, the first slide shows some of the demographics. This is just some high level overview of the data. This is Incura's data. They launched the survey for us. And we've been given permission to do this high level overview. When we launched the survey, it was probably around last October, November. We had 63 respondents. Out of how many? We don't know. This was the first time of trying to get a gauge on how many training programs are out there. But we at least had 63 programs respond, 43 of which are currently being offered. So that was a lot more than I realized were out there. Like I said, I had kind of done a web search and maybe bookmarked 6 or 7 programs that I had learned about just by doing a Google search. So as you can see, there are 15 that are still under development. And some places in the data, we didn't get data. I don't know if it was a survey tool issue or if people just simply didn't respond, but we did have some people that did not report. Overwhelmingly, a vast majority of the programs of those surveyed and those who've responded are targeted to administrators. There were maybe only 2 programs that were targeted exclusively to investigators, maybe a couple that were kind of hybrid. A lot of the times people wrote in the comments, well, our focus is on administrators, but we would allow an investigator, to sit in on any of the trainings or to access our learning modules. We're the same way at Colorado State. I got my position as a result of an audit, and the auditor said, get a training program going. And I think, we'll find that that's kind of a common theme for some institutions. And so my focus was really on training of the research administrators on our systems, policies, operations at Colorado State, but certainly if investigators want to come to that training, they are welcome to, but the focus is not on investigators currently. A vast majority of programs who responded said that their programs are managed centrally. They are working with units such as colleges and departments to develop content and to offer training, but the management of the program is central. And it's really interesting because 12 of the programs that responded have either a half or a full-time person devoted to training. Okay, and then they're relying on teams of volunteers to help deliver some of that training and help develop content as well. Okay. 16 of the programs reported that they were mandatory, mandatory, 41 voluntary. And this was surprising. It's always fun to, really start digging around in the data. I thought, well, of those mandatory programs, probably none of them had a cost. And I was really actually kind of surprised about that because 5 of the programs reported having an associated cost, and of those, 2 of them are mandatory. So some of the mandatory programs do have an associated cost. Those who reported having an associated cost, by and large, it was like a recharge center kind of, and we do that at Colorado State as well for one of our programs. 2 reported that the employee has to pay for the program. But for the mandatory programs that have a cost, the units fund that cost. They're not telling the employee it's mandatory and you have to pay for it. It's mandatory, but your unit pays for it. So that was interesting as well. A number of programs, about half, offer some type of incentives, and the incentives by and large that we saw were some type of certification. One offered a one-time bonus, but mostly it was some type of certification or eligibility for promotion. And not necessarily a promotion, but promotion eligibility, that it would help them to be promotion eligible. So only 7 of the programs, again, this was a surprising one to me. Only 7 of the programs reported having continuing education. For a lot of the programs, it was kind of once you went through it, you were done, that was it. And then for those 7 programs, the average requirement was about 8 hours. And that could be made up of additional trainings there at the institution, or going out to professional conferences like FROC and getting additional trainings. A lot of the programs are using some type of learning management system to track information and to track progress. The learning management systems typically will also give supervisors transparency into how their employees are doing in a certain program, where they are in that program. Some are still using old school, Excel form. So those using the learning management system, their modules are primarily online and behind a firewall. So you wouldn't be able to see those modules, but you could at least contact those programs, ask them about their program, ask them how they decided on content, et cetera. So that's what we're hoping to provide as a service, is really, contact information for some of these programs. If you look at one and you say, hey, this is something that we would like to emulate, you can reach out and talk to some of these institutions on how they went about this. So let's stop there for a second and open it up. We know this is supposed to be a discussion group, but so we'll go ahead and open this up for discussion before we go to some of the content areas in the next slide. And Bob and Julie, if you have anything to chime in with, please do. If there are no questions, we can at least go on to the next slide and look a little bit at the program content, and then we'll kick it over to Julie to start some lines of conversation. Okay, so program content. I'm not going to read this to you. You'll have this. As was mentioned, you'll get a copy of our handouts, which has this information in it. But we basically ask, what content areas are you focused on? It was really all over the board. You'll see areas like research security and compliance aren't as high as some of the post-award compliance areas. In addition to the areas that we had them check the box for, people also said that they're giving CRA programs, CRA readiness. And if you're not familiar with the CRA, it's the Certified Research Administrator credential offered by the RAC, which Jennifer Shambrick alluded to earlier. Some programs will also include research development. The focus of our survey was largely on sponsored programs, though we did ask if people were doing research development type activities, that kind of pre-award arena. And then also on the peer review process. So if we could have the next slide, please, and I'm going to turn it over to Julie. And we can't hear you, Julie.
There you go. Hello, everybody. We're so happy to have you as a part of a discussion group, and we really want to emphasize the discussion group. So really, we're not going to go into a lot of detail to answer these questions that we're posing. We would like to have that more as a discussion. But these came out of an article that appeared in the Ancura magazine that really did talk about some of the critical elements in developing a training program, who should be trained. And it's amazing that pretty much is around, it's not as easy to identify as one would think. In my present institution, we are growing very, very rapidly, and we're very, very proud of that. And with all growing pains, sometimes it's difficult to identify who really is doing research administration. And so that is one of the issues that I think in developing any kind of a training program you might want to think about. The requirement or not required, some of those things come up, particularly in a state university where there might be some kind of prohibition about required training, or you may be able to do that through your HR group. But required or not required training can become an issue within the institution itself, and it's subject to definitely to HR input. Linking to career advancement, Tricia alluded to that, and there are a number of programs that are out there that basically are saying, complete this, whatever it might be, a set of modules, it might be a certificate, it might be a progressive certificate, and we will then attach to that the capacity to then be considered for career advancement. And I think there's some Duke folks on here. I think I saw Pam and Wendy and some others. They can attest to the fact that Duke did put in a career ladder associated with the training. The question of what should be taught then becomes really critical, because if you need to identify who's supposed to be trained, then if you make it required, then that whole concept of what your actually content is going to be and be delivered. A number of schools have differentiated between pre-award and post-award, and they do not require individuals who are in research administration to take both sides of that. So that is also a discussion point that needs to be considered. Who should be a trainer? You know, this goes around a lot. I know that Bob and Tricia are excellent trainers, but I believe also that they reach out to individuals who are subject matter experts and can provide additional information, because one person can't be expected to know all. So that's another consideration. What are the training structures? There are certificate programs. There's ad hoc programs. I know that at my institution, we're using an LMS, and we're using online modules, and we're also then linking those up to live teams, because we can't get people back into that big, large classroom yet. But we're also using a number of resources from SRA and NCURA, and we're putting those out there as well. So it doesn't necessarily need to be just something that's developed in-house. The training delivery mechanisms are all over the place. With COVID and the days of COVID, we have had to scramble to move back into the online environment. And the decision was made at our university that we're going to go online primarily, but we need to have those live sessions. And the live sessions are case study driven, so that you can reinforce what's being learned within the structure of what you get online. And then how do you demonstrate both to the individuals that are going through this training, to your senior leadership, that the investment here is worth it? What drives the senior leadership to both initiate and support a training program? So that's kind of the context of what we wanted to put out there for discussion points. So any thoughts from just the general group that's here? We'd love to hear from you. Any questions you may have, any experiences that you are having currently in your institution, or thoughts about potential obstacles that you're encountering. We may start calling on people here. You can't run.
I just wanted to point out that you can use your video and your microphone during this session. We don't do it in the big room, but I think it really helps to have the videos and microphones on for this type session. So please feel free to do so. We don't care if you have on pajama pants or you're eating an egg salad sandwich.
Hey, Pam. So
Hi,
Pam
Julie.
Montgomery.
How are you?
I am fine. How are you doing, my friend? It's good to see you.
I'm good. I'm good. Good to see you too.
So I think you've had some thoughts. You want to just read those out to the group about what your thoughts are?
Yeah, I was just saying, you made the statement of not having to just go solely with what you've learned from NCURA or any other organizations, agencies that are out there. So yeah, I believe that you take that experience and fit it to the program, that what works for your university.
Exactly. And I think that that's one of the big challenges. You know, they're excellent programs from any number of organizations out there, but we've run into that here at my home institution. You know, how do you customize it? because there's going to be SOPs, there's going to be process and procedures that really have to be enhanced. And so there's a lot of discussion about how you take the more generic information and then how you take it and make it apply to your institution. And that's where an in-house, I mean, I've heard a number of universities kind of come back and say, well, our leadership says we send people to NCURA, we send people to SRA. But where do they come back to the home institution and learn how to do that cost transfer or learn how to do that submission using your system to system platform? So there is a need for that in-house individual if it's not a big team. Anyone else has training programs at their schools that they'd like to make a comment about? Looking to see.
I'd like to ask what people are doing for onboarding when you have someone new come to your institution to orient them, because even if they've been a research administrator at another institution, that it's translatable, but the translation does have to occur.
Right. Onboarding was a big issue for us because during COVID, we had a number of retirements and then new people came on. Some had experience in research administration, some did not. So the onboarding looked different depending upon the person's experience. So, we did develop some core fundamentals of sponsored research administration at our institution. Those are online modules. We would have them go through those first and then sit and talk with them about what questions. For those who came in already with research administration experience, it's really understanding our process, what I call our wonky processes at CSU. If you've seen one sponsored research office, you've seen one sponsored research office, and ours is very unique. I think it's really getting them familiar with acronyms, even a jargon that we use. It's very different than what they might have heard at a different institution. Even when I came in and people would introduce themselves and say, I'm from CVMBS, I'd say, okay, like, I don't know what that means. Like, what's that college acronym? You're really getting them up to speed quickly on some of the jargon and acronyms, and then into the processes, because our processes right now are still cumbersome. We're going through and trying to make changes in those processes, but we do still have a number. What are our policies? We don't have a lot of policies, so therefore, then what's some of the guidance that we do have? So it really has to focus on those CSU specific nuances that could be very different than from where they came from.
So Lacey tells us that she has a crazy
Right.
outside the box idea about training. All right, Lacey, you're on.
I could talk about this all day, so I'll try to keep it concise. One of the things in my experience that has always been a flaw of centralized training programs is that they have to be broad by their nature, but so much of our work is so specific. And once you get in there and start doing it, it's a whole different ballgame. And so I really want to see an institution try an internal consulting approach. So where you have a group of actual research administrators who are responsible for recruitment and onboarding and training, and like a chargeback model. So you have a unit that is say hiring. It takes a lot of resources to do a real recruitment, and so you bring in this internal consulting group. They come in, they run the recruitment, and it's real research admins who know what to look for. And then they actually sit with that employee, they do their work with them, they onboard them like a partner that's outside of the department, so that you're not taking resources away from the productivity of that department. And they're getting, in conjunction with a centralized model of training, on the job training, a shadow system, or a shadow approach with a partner. And then also, have that group participate in follow-ups, like 6 months in, they come back and assess things and make recommendations. So an internal consulting on onboarding and training approach.
Thank you, Lacey. And we're getting a number of comments about mentor and mentee. Let me throw something out that not to debunk the mentor mentee. I think it's an excellent idea. One of the things that I've encountered through the years, though, you got to make sure that your mentor actually does it the right way. Otherwise, you're passing along bad information. And so that becomes, I know at a previous institution, we had subject matter experts that were vetted and brought in to become the subject matter experts, so that we were very cautious that they really were doing things exactly the way that they should. But there's a lot of mentor-mentee approaches. And I'm kind of curious, what size school is this where the mentor and mentee approaches are being used? Is it like very, very large?
We
Those
do
of
it at Auburn.
You do?
Yes.
How's that working, Bob?
It's undergoing some major revisions to make it more one-on-one. Right now, we had what are called compass navigators that worked with a team of maybe 3-4 of the class participants. And we're going to look at breaking that down so that there's more of a one-to-one relationship that's developed, and they can devote more time to that relationship than they have in the past. But overall, the class participants really have, I think, accepted that very well.
Mhm.
I also
So,
want to indicate that we have a introductory class that's held for just 4 hours for anybody that's in terms of onboarding. And it's also a prerequisite class to our larger Compass program, which is 2 semesters in length. So people can take the intro class and that's all they want to have, that's fine. Or they can use that as the prerequisite to the larger 2-semester class.
is anyone having, this is facetious question, because I know the answer is yes. You know, you open up the research admin listserv and there are just so many opportunities for people. Everybody's looking for research administrators. And it seems to me that begs the question, how are you going to bring them in? And we are in Greenville, North Carolina. Lovely place. Anybody who's interested, please contact me. It's a great place to be. An hour and a half to the beach. I know I'm recruiting here, but we are having difficulty in recruiting people who have experience in research administration. And I think that's pretty much across the board. A lot of it has to do with remote access and that kind of thing. So one of the things that we are talking about doing is literally building our own, is growing our own folks, is finding people that have an interest in it and providing them with this training. And so they're really just right there. We went through a huge number of budget cuts, which really cut down on our administrative staff. And so the folks that we have now are really pushed. But getting people who are interested in moving into a research administration position might be also some kind of an asset with the training program. Just wondered if anyone else has been either experiencing the recruiting issues or thinking about doing that sort of an internal vehicle. So we're getting some answers here. Let's see.
We've done similar things at UCF. We have an onboarding training program as folks come in, and dependent on their level of experience, we tailor the onboarding to that. And they actually get to sit with every single member of the team one-on-one on a subject matter that they consider themselves experts on. And then that person is then paired with a mentor for the course of the remainder of their training, whether that's 3 months in, 6 months, 9 months, and so on. One of the things that I make sure that we remind our mentors is you have to provide breadcrumbs. And I think a lot of times we're experts in what we do and we're doing things sort of mechanically at some point because it's just second nature to us. But we have to remember that the folks coming in that are new to this kind of need a little bit more of assistance. We can't just say, okay, we're doing this way, here's where you go. We also have to provide the why. Why are we doing it? You know, where is it that we can find that? You know, we find it in this policy, but this policy also relates back to, say, the uniform guidance, and this is why we do it. You know, so it's important to remember to always provide those types of things so that they can see, oh, these are the resources that I can come back and look for answers.
Mhm. So really good points. Penn State I think Penn State just came in and said they partnered with a local business, and the chat went pretty fast by there. Did I read that right? So Jessica, you guys are partnering with local business schools to create a class to introduce individuals to research administration. Cool. And is there a charge for that? Do they have to, is there like a tuition charge?
So this is Jessica. So the students are already attending. It's like a trade school, probably not a trade school, but they're learning business. They get associate degrees there. And so what Penn State has done is taken one of the classes and have come and taught about research administration. And then they offer them, as part of getting their associate degree, they have to have an internship. So Penn State offers as an opportunity for them to do the internship at Penn State.
Now, are you one of the schools that continue? I know years ago, there was a charge for taking the classes through continuing ed. Is that still the process there? Or no?
If you want credit for the class, yes, but Penn State has separate from that, they have research administration, sort of like a 9-month program that you go through, and it doesn't cost anything to do that.
That's pretty cool. Just sort of shifting gears just a bit, is it hard to convince the senior leadership that a training program is essential? Tricia alluded to the fact that they had an audit, and the audit said you're going to have a training program, which is pretty cool. That gives you a real entree into their field. What's the argument? I know, Bob, you had that experience, not that they were resistant, but I think when you proposed Compass, there was a lot of questions about, do we need it and where are we going with it?
Well, it took a while for the program to be widely accepted. I think part of the reason it was accepted is that we offered it, it was open to whomever wanted to attend, both research administrators, and we've had associate dean, faculty attend the classes as well. And I think once they saw that it was a significant benefit to whomever was in the class, that it was more widely accepted.
Yeah. What drove it at ECU is an emerging institution, if you will. We have had just phenomenal growth. And just to give you sort of the size, we've gone from what, 40 million to about 80 million in like 3 or 4 years. So the strain on research administration and the fact that we did have a number of budget cuts, and so administrative staff were the ones that actually, those positions were the ones that got cut. So there really has not been a reluctance at ECU, which I'm very grateful for. They want a training program, and now we're talking about trying to build our own, grow our own. But I think the return on investment is also imperative in developing a training program, constantly reinforcing that it's relieving the burden on faculty, that 49% administrative burden that faculty feel in managing projects. So I think there's a need for a communication process that reinforces this to the senior level. Has anyone run into that, or is it, any thoughts on that?
Julie, we've had to make the case. If any of you were in the session that Tamara Gabris did, where she talked about the PASS program, where we have a unit that handles those offices that don't do enough proposals to warrant having their own research administrator, like the provost office. You know, high profile, low support when it comes to research admin. But yet we've got to make sure that those folks are taken care of. The way that we were able to make that come about, and Celeste and I worked on this together. It took more than, probably, what was it, Celeste, more than a year to make the case. But what we had to do was make the case using metrics and show that there are 80 proposals going out. Some of them come in as awards before we knew that there was a proposal. And then we get this award where, you know, they promised to give away the farm and they've cost shared something that has already been cost shared, and, you know, all these problems would occur. It ended up taking more time to manage it on the back end than it would have been on the front end. And it's taking resources away from other programs. So once we made the case that, look, there's 80 proposals and this is who we're taking care of, the metrics were what drove the case. And then another method that you can use, but approach with caution, is just let it blow up one time, you know, and maybe not intentionally have it blow up, but when it blows up, use those instances to say, this is exactly what we're talking about, having a need for research administrators. So when you get that fine, or you get that audit finding, or you get this, you know, research administrators are the answer to this. And you can't, you can only stretch a person so far. So that, I guess I was just trying to say metrics are what works. So keep a record and measure everything. And when you've got a big increase like you've had it at ECU, you've got some really good metrics to work with.
And that's the reason that my shop is compliance monitoring, where we drive all the metrics and training, so that there's a match up there. Any other thoughts? Tricia? My notes here.
I was actually, I jotted down some notes, Julie, back when you were talking about required, not required, and linked to career advancement. So, you know, as we talked about mentoring and growing your own, I noted in the chat that 4 of our current wonderful administrators came in from a temp pool as administrative assistants. They showed a lot of interest in the work they were doing. They asked a lot of great questions, and we said, do you want to be a research administrator? A couple of them did not have degrees. And at the time at CSU, you had to have, you know, a 4-year degree, didn't matter the field, to get into that position. So I went to HR and said, hey, you know, if we can get them to get either the CRA certification, or if we can develop this internal certification program, can we use that in lieu of the degree? And HR said yes. And so we were able then to train up some of our administrative assistants, and they're now research administrators. So I do love the grow your own model. It's something, back when I was at Western Kentucky, we had a student worker in our office who worked there for 4 years. She graduated, she became our administrative assistant. Then she became the head of IRB, and now she's running a research administration shop down in the College of Education. So I think, you know, in those smaller schools, as you can grow your own, we do run the risk sometimes of being a little insular when we do that. So, you know, having new people come in as well is good too. I think it's finding a balance there. But you know, working with your HR is so important, even if it's not for the whole required, not required is a whole other deal. Because our HR, when we were talking about that, said, well, what happens if somebody doesn't pass exams, and do they lose their job? Or, you know, even if you make requirement contingent upon, our system access contingent upon requirement, and somebody then doesn't get access to a system, can they do their job? We honestly didn't want to tackle that at our institution, so we stayed away from that. But we still had the conversations with HR for those people who maybe didn't have the experience or the degree requirements that some of these positions often had. You know, would they allow substitution? And we were fortunate that they said yes. So, you know, I think there's a lot to be said about engaging with HR and having these conversations. And then I love the grow your own model.
One of the things, the 3 first modules that we put up are basically an orientation to ECU. And the feedback we're getting on that is not just for research administrators, but new faculty are being encouraged. So even if they're highly experienced faculty, they're coming because we do it a different way than Yale does or another school does. So they're being encouraged to review those modules. So it's an introduction to research administration at ECU, the various offices and the various processes that we use. And then there's a second one that builds on that. We're hearing that postdocs are taking it. We're hearing that, you know, certain graduate students are taking it. So it has the potential, a lot of that content has the potential of spreading out and being a benefit to not just the research administration community. So that's something to think about when you're putting programs together. Let's see, any other thoughts on this? What should be taught? That's a real challenge, isn't it? I think Tricia or Bob, someone alluded to the fact that you have to have SOPs in place. You have to have your processes written down. Otherwise, you're all over the place in terms of your training. That was one of the challenges that we had at ECU. I've been at other institutions that had that very, very well structured, and it was easy to build training on top of it because those processes had been well defined. Because we grew so fast, they really weren't. And so that was part of building the training program, is reviewing every one of the SOPs, making sure they were up to date. And we're still in the process of doing that. And then building out the training from there, because we had to have something that was substantive in the background that we could point to. And I think, Tricia, you mentioned that, or maybe Lacey did, someone that mentioned it. That, Celeste, I think it was you that said, let me show you the UG. Let me tell you why we're doing it this way, because if you don't do it this way, this is the problem. We unashamedly cite audits of other institutions. We will do that. We subscribe to 2 or 3 newsletters that my vice chancellor said, don't send me any more bad news. I don't want to see it. But as long as it's not us, he's perfectly happy to get it. And we will do that. We will monitor to see where other pitfalls are from other institutions and other entities. And we'll go back and double check to make sure we're addressing that in our training. So it's an ongoing process. It's not an establish the content and you're set. There's always some tweaking. And that kind of provides us with a challenge, because I saw a number of these institutions that came back and said, no, we don't really require continuing education. Well, research administration isn't static, and it can't be static. It has to have some constant refreshment of it. And so thinking about how that works and how you make that happen and how you infuse new content, I think is critical. Any thoughts on that? Celeste, I know you've got a Cracker Jack training program. I see some Duke people that continuing ed is critical. Any thoughts on keeping it fresh, keeping it alive?
One of the things that we've done, we have it hasn't happened since we've been out, but if you attend 12 trainings and people can cafeteria style pick and choose which ones they want to attend, because we offer them every week, at least one every week. If they attend 12, they achieve a level. And so here at UCF, we're the UCF Knights. So you start out as a page, and then you work up to a knight, and then a golden knight, and then a starry night. I don't know, remember what all of them are. But we make a great big deal out of the certificate awards. And that's a part of our Research Admin Day awards. And so if somebody goes through and does 36 trainings, they're going to get the 3 certificates and, a handshake from the vice president of research, their name up in stars, and we found that, I mean, you touched on incentives, but we found that just that incentive, it's a piece of paper, for that we made it up, but it is a goal for them to work toward, and it's a milestone. It's something that they can talk about in their annual review. every thing that they take, and people are goal oriented. I think that that's something that, first of all, it forces us to be thinking all the time, what are we going to do, 3 weeks from now, what trainings are we going to offer? And it doesn't always have to be research administration. It could be ancillary to research administration. For example, how do you decide if someone is a consultant or are they actually an employee if we pay them to do this thing? So we might want to have somebody come in that's an expert in that area to give that training, which is what we did. And it also helps that area realize that we've got all these people over here in research trying to make these decisions. We better make it easy for them to make the decisions, and they'll make decision trees for us and things like that. So there's a lot more good comes out of the training than just the actual training module itself.
So I'm trying to figure out, we're the pirates. I'm trying to figure out how we could build that in. And the only thing I could come up with is if you don't pass it, you walk the plank, but that's probably not appropriate either. So one of the things that we've run into, and Tricia and Bob, please chime in, is even ECU is not that big. It's not that a big, huge institution, but by the same token, we just don't talk to each other a lot. And that was one of the issues that we had, plus the fact that one group does it one way and one group does another. So we unabashedly, again, borrowed, and I'm trying to remember if we stole this from Michigan or Minnesota or one of the M schools, where they had a Research Administration Information Network, or RAIN. So we brought that in-house, and we have monthly meetings, and it started out with 12 people. We now have somewhere 50, 60. It's semi-structured, and it has really caught on. So we're going to a different fund accounting process. And so our assistant vice chancellor needed to get to the people who are most familiar, who have the most to do with that, and needed to get that message out. And so she brought it to the RAIN meeting. So that's another mechanism.
Julie, we do something similar at Colorado State. Our associate VP is Krista Johnson. She's very well known in research administration. And it was really her idea to get the community together, particularly central and units, because when she came in, it was very much us and them, mentality. And now it's us together. And it's also an identification that these folks are research administrators, people who were like, I didn't even know the term. And now, they wear their research administrator capes with pride. So we do a monthly, we're the Rams, CSU Rams. So we do a Ram around every month, and it's, really well attended. We always have at least 80 participants, even when we were doing it in person, and we would have to get a great big room because we would have, bagels and coffee in the morning. Even when we moved online, we still have people, and we'll invite in units like procurement, business and financial services to talk about, what's coming down the pike, what's going to impact their role. And some of these folks are full-time research administrators. Some of them, it's just part of their, duties in their unit, but they still come and are part of that community. And then we developed a Ram Around listserv as well, for not only for Central to share out information, but for everybody to ask questions and share information. When somebody has a question, they can post it on our internal listserv and get an immediate response internally. So it's a really great way to build community and build that sense of understanding that we're all research administrators and we're all in this together.
If I talked about our programs, it would be changing it from Colorado State to Auburn. We do much the same. We have campus conversations. Those are quarterly, where we have faculty or provosts come in and talk to the participants that are in Compass. And lately we've been putting it out on Zoom, and we've gotten much higher in attendance using Zoom than person to person. And then we have another program called AU Span, where we meet on a regular basis and invite guest speakers to come in and talk about topics in research administration. So it's quite similar to what Tricia has at Colorado State. But we try to enhance the communication amongst our administrators, just so that everybody is talking, and it helps when they're exchanging information for that.
So Kay, I think I saw a hand up. Let's see. Kay, did you?
Yes, I apologize. I cannot get my video to turn on, even though I'm looking right at my camera. I
We'll
have a
just
meeting
wave
with
back
Tricia
to
next week. Thank you, Tricia. I am brand new to a research education program position. It is a new position itself. And I raised my hand when we were talking about some innovative things that might be used. And I love all of your ideas. I have a long-term, oh, look, now it's telling me to start my video. I see you're in control. So see if I can get it to go on this camera though. No. All right, I'll look over here. So can you see me now?
Yes.
Okay.
Hello.
I can't see you, but that's fine. I come from a philosophy background, and I was very interested in pedagogy. I used to develop programs in my head when I was young. And one of the things I'm going to try to do, and it's a brand new program, so I wasn't able to say very much in the survey. I love the buddy idea that somebody mentioned, as long as we're really careful about the material. But one of the things I'm doing as I just start to build this, so there's nothing there really, is to talk to the staff within my research operations about how every trainer is a learner and every trainee is a teacher. And I want them to be thinking about that as they interact in their training sessions. And we're recording sessions because we really can't be live yet up here in Boston. And so the idea that I'm trying to present to everyone in our leadership meetings and our bigger team meetings is that we all have knowledge to share, and that as a long-term teacher in philosophy, a very difficult subject, I didn't feel like I really learned until I started teaching. So this is not programmatic. It's sort of at a meta level, right? Of getting people into a different attitude about training. Now, I'm not doing this with investigators. I'm not only doing it within my department, but many of those people are going to be our trainers and our trainees for regular continuing education and for buddy system. And so I don't know how many people have kind of thought about that, like, what is it really like to learn? But I find it inspiring for me.
So Lacey, you have your hand up. Hey, Lacey.
Hi. So along those same lines, I know I'm repeating myself, but so much of the learning that I've done has been more work, right? I'm doing the work, I'm solving whatever problems in front of me. I usually don't know how to solve the problem right away. So I think training programs are important, but I think a missing component is ongoing, on-demand access to resources. And by resources, I mean human resources. So being able to, I mean, one of the reasons that the research admin listserv is so widely used and popular is because it's real time. I can put a question out there and I get a response. You know, maybe it's the right response. Maybe someone else has a different idea than the first responder, and it's an open discussion. And I worry, I haven't really experienced that on an institutional level for either of the institutions I work for, where I can have access to a community of research admins to talk through problems. And I'm wondering if anyone else has an institutionalized message board system or something like that.
We have people that come in CMSI. It's basically an open discussion group for CMSI. But yeah, I think at one point Duke talked about that, and Pam or Wendy or whoever's on there. I don't know if that's still going on. The concern that we had with that is the misinformation that might go out. And so we wanted to make sure that whatever we put in place was monitored. But any communication is primary and essential. And Jennifer, how much more time do we have? I don't want to get us going.
Elizabeth just told us we had 5 minutes, and I think a minute's elapsed of that. So
Okay.
she'll suck us out of here whenever whenever her time runs out.
Well, I wanted to thank Tricia and Bob for starting this whole initiative with the compendium and a survey, because that's going to be a huge resource for people to say, well, that program looks like something I'd be interested in. Let me go call someone. So just reiterate, please, if you can. And I'm not sure if it's restricted to Ancora members or not, Bob. Do you know? Or is it just an open link?
I think it's an open link.
Okay.
And Tricia put the link back up on chat.
If
That's
you'll
super.
send a link to me in an email so I don't lose it, I'll send it out and ask people if they have a training program to take a look at it, if you would like for me to.
That would be great. So the sort of the last thing I wanted to kind of comment on with these questions that we were asking, where do you start? Primarily, we started in every program I've developed with the body of knowledge, recognizing that it may or may not be as fleshed out as you'd like it to be, because that gives you your fundamentals. And one of the things that we found really helped was looking at the body of knowledge, looking at roles and responsibilities within the institution. And there's got to be a matrix somewhere of who's supposed to be doing what. And that really enables you to trace back to what they need to learn. And then actually, when I got to ECU, I was very fortunate. Our vice chancellor put me in touch with one of our adult education faculty, who taught me more about learning objectives than it was just amazing, and how he tied the learning objectives back to the content. So that was a real help for us. Starting there with sort of your baseline, roles and responsibilities, who's supposed to be doing what, and then your learning objectives, which drive into your content and also drive into your evaluation. So I just threw that out. I've been doing this for quite a number of years. My daughter says I'm older than dirt, but that was a real revelation to me about how to really make that work. And Bob and Tricia probably already knew that. And I know Jennifer does too, but just a thought to share with you.
I think the roles and responsibilities matrix is a good place to start in looking at what are the key elements that you need to have in a training program. And it doesn't have to be an hour long. It could be 5 minutes long, inserted into some other meeting if that's what needs to happen. So it just needs to be occurring all the time. We will.
Any further thoughts?
We'll have a copy of the transcript available to Julie, Bob, and Tricia. I think that the comments you're going to find them valuable as
Absolutely.
well. Okay. Thank you, everyone. And thank you especially to our speakers for sharing with us. This has been wonderful. About 100 people were in here, and I think everyone that attended has definitely benefited. Thank you so much once again for being so generous to give up your time.
Thank you very much. It's been a pleasure.
Yeah, thanks for the opportunity, Jennifer.
Mhm.
Thank you.
Y'all take care.
Good afternoon. Thank you for joining us for Friday's Contracts and Research Law track session. Please again, remain on mute during the presentation. If you have any questions, please put them in the chat. We're going to be answering them sort of as they come up based on category and saving any general questions towards the end. And this Zoom is going to be recorded. Thank you very much. We are fortunate enough today to have Michael Slocum join us again to talk about copyright and data, the basics for research. Mr. Slocum is the senior member of the law firm Slocum & Bodie, specializing in contract law, legal issues related to clinical, applied, and basic research, corporate issues, intellectual property, and executive estate planning. He has more than 40 years of experience and has represented hospital systems, hundreds of business, both in the US and non-US, universities, nonprofit organizations, and even agencies of the federal government. Mr. Slocum negotiates clinical and other research contract terms with drug companies and other entities on a daily basis. Mr. Slocum began private practice with his own law firm in 1980. He is an honor graduate of DePaul University and received a JD with honors from George Washington University National Law Center. He is a member of the Virginia State Bar. He is a distinguished faculty member of the Society of Research Administrators and an adjunct professor in the Graduate School of Nursing at the Uniformed Services University of Health Sciences. Please join me in welcoming Michael.
Thank you very much. As Jeff said, I've been involved with research for a long time. And one of the other things that I do is on one of the track chairs for the SRA conferences. The copyright program that we're about to do today is what we as track chairs call an evergreen. We try and do it every national conference and most regional conferences as well, because in research, while we all think about, oh, what happens if you get a patent? By far the more common result of research is a copyright. You get a publication, you get presentations, and those things are covered by copyright. And the copyright is protecting the product of the research institution. So the copyright process is just enough different from the patent process that it can be very confusing to those of us who are not daily workers in the intellectual property field. So let's go to the next slide. Okay, what is it we're doing with copyright? First of all, we're protecting works. That is a term of art in the copyright law. A work is one of a long list of things that are protectable by copyright as opposed to patent, trademark, or some other intellectual property law legal concept. It also determines, the copyright law determines who in fact is the author, who is the initial owner, the preparer or developer of the work. And also then, if in the absence of agreement by the people who are involved, it'll also determine who gets to be the author. Then it provides a method for protection of your rights as an owner, and as whether you're the author or a subsequent owner. And then it provides the framework for dealing with the fact that copyright, unlike a lot of other things, can exist at the same time for two different people in the same product. Okay, next slide. That's a derivative. Go ahead. Okay, so first of all, what's protected? Literary, and no matter how dry, no matter how boring, that scientific product is a literary work. It also then protects, but we're not going to cover musical, dramatic, choreographic, pictorial, or graphic, audiovisual, and architectural works. Those will seldom, if ever, be scientific works. The copyright then gives the owner a set of rights, and they're very specific rights Those include the right to reproduce and to prepare derivative works. Those are things we're going to come back to. The copyright law also decides when do we have a work that can in fact be copywritten, and it defines whether or not a work is original enough to be copyrightable. All right. If you are interested in doing a deeper dive, this article that's referenced, even though it's now 12 years old coming on, is an excellent, slightly more than basic article on copyright. Next slide. Let's do the next slide. Thank you. Okay. First of all, the copyright vests in the author of the work. When we get over into patents, we talk about the inventor of the invention, and deal with that. Here we're talking about the author. That is the person who develops the work. That author can transfer the copyright to anybody else, but they are the initial owners, and they then have, as I say, this series of rights: reproduction, creation of derivative works, distribution of copies, and then display. All right, next slide. All right. Part of the problem we run into, however, when we start talking about research works, is that the research itself can take multiple forms. So a scholarly work might be implemented by a software program, or the scholarly work could actually be displayed or reproduced through software. And at that point, we begin to get into issues of, is that a different work, a derivative work, patentable versus copyrightable, and so forth. All right, we have this thing called work for hire. All right, and work for hire is a very specific doctrine we're going to talk about more, and that will transfer who is the author of the work from the actual person to their employer by law. We'll come back to that. Other issues come about, and particularly in scholarly work, nowadays, most works, if not all, are the subject of collaborations, either between institutions, with a professor and students, or postdocs, or other research collaborators within the institution who may or may not be employees. And then issues of consultants and their contribution and how they come in. And I say consultants in very broad terms, someone who's not an employee, but who is working under some type of a contract. And then non-faculty employees. And this is particularly important because most, if not all, universities have a sharing policy that determines how copyrights and other intellectual property rights are distributed between the employees and the institution. Those policies often don't cover non-faculty employees. And then we find, oops, a non-faculty employee has in fact made an authorship level contribution. How do we deal with that? All right, next slide. Okay. It's important to recognize that joint copyright is not based on percentage of effort or how important your effort is, or did you do the better part of the work or the less part of the work. If you contribute any portion beyond what the lawyers call de minimis, so anything that's more than just a jot or a tittle, and there was any intent at the time that the contributors be joint contributors, then we have joint copyright holders. Even though, again, you may have only contributed 10%, if there is a determination or an intention that you be a contributor, then you are a equal co-owner. And when I say equal, many people think about equal being 50-50. That's not the case. As with many things that are joint, you actually have an equal right to 100% of the whole. So if you wrote 10% of the book, that doesn't mean that you are now, because you're joint, 50% of the book is yours. No, you have the same rights that someone who wrote the other 90% of the book has. That is 100% of those rights. The only right you don't get is the right to do exclusive licenses, because obviously there are joint owners. All right. So now keep in mind, the rules we're talking about are ownership rights. Attribution, so who's the lead author or who is to be listed first, second, third, and fourth on the JAMA or New England Journal of Medicine listing, those are different issues. All right, next slide. Okay, copyright is something that's limited by time, but the law continues to change, and it may change again. In the United States, we have what's called the Mickey Mouse rule. And it's not because it's not important, it's because it's all based on Disney. Mickey Mouse was first published in 1923, and we keep getting changes so that the Mickey Mouse cartoons continue to be under copyright. We may see that change this most recent round because it's coming up, and those cartoons may finally fall out of copyright protection if Disney's not able to get yet another extension on the rules. Now, the rules are reasonably complex in the sense that if you are an individual author owner, you get life plus, right? If you are a corporate author, that is, it's a work for hire, you get a specific period of time. So what I would suggest is, if you're looking at older works, go to the Copyright Information Center, look at your particular work, and fit it within the charts that the good folks at Cornell have done for us in terms of determining how long your copyright is. All right, next slide. Okay, some things that can't be copyrighted. Facts, that's the most important thing in scientific work. The math of a math scholarly work cannot be copyrighted. The math of an algorithm cannot be copyrighted. Recipes cannot be copyrighted for evolutionary reasons, if you want to put it that way. There's no particular reason why recipes shouldn't be copyrightable, but they are excluded by law. The alphabet of any sort cannot be copyrighted, but that's not to say that fonts can be copyrighted. So Times Roman is a copyrighted font. Arial, Calibri, these are all copyrighted fonts, but the letters underlying those fonts can't be copyrighted. Okay? Grammatical tropes, and the example I give is I before E except after C, but one I just ran into was the I love, and then you put something else after that, and the Copyright Office fought me to the death on that, and I lost. So I was not able to copyright a particular phrase with the I love and then or the I heart, if you want to put it that way, phrase. And then the idea cannot be copyrighted. You must fix it in a tangible medium. But how long does the tangible medium have to last? It can be anything that is determinable in time. So anything that's not truly in that theoretically instantaneous form. So if it in a very famous case, the actual copyrightable work existed for only pieces of a second. And that was enough. All right, next slide. All right. You'll see, particularly in contracts with European or Canadian or South American, basically any country except the United States, you'll routinely see language in your contract that's talking about moral rights. Moral rights are a series of rights in addition to the normal copyright that go to the individual's rights in works. They may or may not be the author because of the work for hire doctrine. They may or may not be the owner because they may have transferred their rights, but the moral rights they either maintain unless they separately give them up, or in some countries, they can't give them up. They are automatically maintained by the initial writer, putter together of the work. The right of attribution, that is, who gets to say, I'm one of the authors, I'm the person who did this work to start with. That's a right of attribution. The right to be anonymous or pseudonymous, I can never pronounce that word, pseudonymous. That is a right that in many countries does exist as a moral right. And then the so-called right to the integrity of the work. So if you don't have moral rights, then I could take apart and your particular work and redo it once I have the right to do derivative works or to otherwise modify your work in one way or another. Maybe through fair use, it may be through a contract right, it may be through statutory rights. But if you still have moral rights under the various European or other laws, then you as the original author could say, no, you can't take my work and take it apart and sample it, for example. In the United States, we have sampling by rap and other musical artists in particular. That right is restricted in most of the rest of the world beyond the level that it's restricted in the United States. Now, for films and other visual works only, then in the United States, there's a separate code section dealing with what would otherwise be moral rights in other countries. But those moral rights in the United States do not apply except to visual works. Next slide. Okay. It's important now as you think about copyright to recognize that when we start talking about ownership, we're more in an analogous situation to biology than we are to chemistry. And what do I mean by that? If you have a particular product, a pound of gold, all right, and I say, okay, I'm going to give you half of that. We both have a half a pound of gold, and there's no way that either of us can have more than that. I've given you my half, the half of what I had, and that's all we've got. However, in a biological analogy, then we can have multiple ownerships in the same thing. If I have a cell line and I give you a couple of cells out of that and we both grow the cell lines, now we can both have a pound of the cells and once they grow. So that in patents, okay, once I've given you those patent rights, okay, I've transferred a right to you and it's gone unless I've kept those through some kind of a grant back. But if I have a copyrighted work and I give you a license, in many cases, we both have rights in that same work. For example, and this is an actual case, I had a client who actually went to this. If the original author gives you right to translate the work into, and in the case that I dealt with, it was a translated an accounting textbook into Russian. And the original copyright owner did not take any kind of a grant back. And so the original copyright owner had the right to translate his own work into Russian. And now my client had the right to translate that same work into Russian. And today that accounting book is on sale in Moscow by both publishers, by both authors in this case. My client was the author of the derivative work to translate the accounting book. And once the original author saw that, they did the same thing and put it out in competition. So copyrights, you need to deal with the fact that you can generate multiple owners of essentially the same item. Okay, next slide. All right, and that's what the whole idea of derivative work is all about. I can take your work, or I can take my own work, and I can turn it into another work. I can do that by translating it. I can do that in music by arranging or making recordings. I can take a factual situation, a factual book even, and dramatize it or fictionalize it. I can make motion pictures out of your work. I can do reproduction of art. I can do whether they're lithographs or those kinds of reproductions, or now digital reproductions. That's what the whole idea of this so-called NFT is all about, is setting up a digital reproduction that cannot then be further reproduced without approval, right? And then I can do abridgments, condensations, and so forth. I can then add additional commentary and so forth. That's still a derivative work. So these are all rights that the copyright owner has and can transfer, but they don't have to. All right, next slide. Okay, your instructors, your professors are going to say, oh, but fair use, fair use. Well, fair use is something that does exist for copyright. So it's with a minor exception, would not happen over in patent law. But in copyright, there are lots of times where by law, we've said, okay, you can use someone else's copyrighted materials for limited purposes. And those limits are set out in the code first, but then have been subject to a huge number of court decisions over what is and what is not fair use. And it varies by what are you doing first. If you're an educational institution, you have a greater latitude for fair use as long as you're using them for teaching, research, so forth. Now, if that educational institution is taking someone's copyrighted works and turning it into a money-making movie, that's a different situation. You're not using those within that scope of that fair use. It also depends on the nature of the copyrighted work. If I take a part of a newspaper, an article, a textbook, and use it for educational use, that's much more likely to be accepted as fair use than if I took again, a rap song, say, and wanted to play that as the background music for my lectures. All right. How much are we using? If I take a couple of pages out of a textbook and use those for a class, that's almost certainly to be accepted as fair use at least once or twice. If I keep using it year after year, maybe not. If I take half of your textbook and use it for my class and reproduce copies for all the students, almost certainly not fair use. All right. And then what's the effect in the market for that copyrighted use? So once again, if I'm taking a part of your textbook and using it for my class, and that means that the students won't buy your textbook, you probably have a good claim against me for copyright violation because it's not fair use. Next slide. Okay. Again, Cornell comes to the aid, as does Stanford. There are two university checklists that help us. And so if you have a fair use question, I would suggest, again, go to the Cornell checklist. And if it is dealing with software or computer materials of any sort, go to the cyber law checklist at Stanford. And once again, this is not the same thing as doing attribution or citation. An example would be, even if I cite your materials every time, if I'm simply picking up and copying your materials and then saying, here's the argument, here's the argument, here's the argument, and not doing my own original work, I probably am going way beyond fair use. The reason I say probably, all of this is very fact dependent, all right? Links, referrals, social media, copies back to the citation, those are not copyright violations. But again, if you start doing a lot of embedded links to commercial materials in your materials, that's a different situation. Okay, next slide. Okay, now you will, to the extent that you get into copyright materials in the current events area, you'll start to see something called transformative use. Now, what is transformative use? There's a lot of transformative use of materials in education and research. Criticisms of other people's copyrighted work almost certainly is transformative use. So now if I take an extended quote even from your materials in order to show that your statements are incorrect or are biased or any other reason I'm criticizing your particular work, even if it's positive, it's to show that you really know what you're talking about. That's not a copyright violation. That's a transformative use, and it is specifically accepted in the statute. If I am taking your words and quoting them at length, not to talk about your words, but to discuss your character or your beliefs, and particularly again to criticize those, that is again transformative use and not a copyright violation. If I take your particular material not to take it for any other purpose, but to prove the fact from what you've said, and that again is not a matter of simply saying, well, this person said this and therefore it's a fact, but if I am actually using your material for factual support, that's not a copyright violation. And then again, if I'm simply summarizing what you've said, that's not a copyright violation. There are some other areas that are specifically protected going all the way up to the Supreme Court. So parodies. So if I take what you have said in all seriousness and use it to make fun of what you've said or of you or of the concepts, that is something that's specifically allowed in law and in the copyright law. If I am using your particular language to evoke the symbolism of what you've said, so particularly in things that are maybe poetic or philosophical, you will see this. If I take again a quote, even an extended quote from your materials in order to talk about how great an artist you are or how terrible an artist you are, these would be accepted. And then again, the various uses that we see in internet and social media particularly, where something has been transformed into a meme, is the hot topic today. Is it or is it not a copyright violation when I take your artistic work or your literary work or some combination and use it as a meme? Okay, next slide. All right, so now I'm the owner, and we'll come back to whether or not I'm the owner because I'm the author, the individual author, or because I'm the work for hire author. But I get the right not only to own this, but to transfer this. And I can transfer this by transferring the entire set of rights, or I can transfer just part of those rights. And once I start slicing and dicing, I can transfer in terms of the amount of rights that I give you, the use that I give you, the market in which you can use those rights, and the time in which you can use those rights. So those are all ways I can slice and dice my transfer rights. All right. So if I transfer exclusive rights to you, then, and I do not maintain a right at all, I can actually give away my rights so I don't have them anymore. I can also then transfer the rights to you exclusively, except I maintain some rights. Now, copyright transfer must be in writing. That's by law. So I can't give you rights except that are legally enforceable, except with a written document. That's normally going to be either an assignment or a license. Those are the two names for the two kinds of agreements. All right. If I give you non-exclusive rights, I do not technically have to have a written agreement. As a practical matter, transfers, even on a non-exclusive basis, are almost always by written agreement. All right. In some cases, of course, copyrights are transferred by operation of law. That's again one of those legal words of art, they're called, or terms of art, meaning even though I didn't do it with a written agreement or an unwritten agreement or any kind of agreement, and maybe not even by agreement, I didn't want to transfer them, it can transfer because the law says so. So the easiest example, of course, is if the company goes bankrupt, the copyrights are assets and they transfer to the trustee in bankruptcy as part of the assets of the bankrupt. If I am an employee and I develop a work, then under US law, by operation of law, I'm not the author, my employer is, as long as it's within the scope of my employment. If I die and I have a copyright, then the copyrights transfer like other assets, either by will or by intestate succession or as part of a trust succession or so forth. All right. And then a copyright is considered personal property. So when you start looking at the general laws of a state that involve ownership of personal property, contracts for personal property, transfers of personal property, those state laws apply, and for that matter, any federal laws, but most personal property right laws are states. Next slide. Okay, again, contract, all right. If you are transferring some but not all the right, it's usually a license. If you're transferring everything, it's an assignment. If you're doing transfer of all the rights, but only for a limited period of time, it's still normally an assignment. But the title you put on something is not nearly as important as the actual words you use. So if you are transferring essentially permanently, completely, then it's going to be more in the nature of an assignment. If it is a transfer just for use or for a limited period of time or limited markets or for limited activities, it's almost certainly more in the nature of a license. And again, licenses have lots of ways you can slice and dice. Those are shown at the bottom: exclusive, non-exclusive, time, geography, the type of media in which you can use it, and then almost any other aspect you could imagine. All right, next slide. All right, so we talk about express licenses. Express does not mean fast. Express means we've written it down, all right? And then you can also have an implied license. So if you have transferred a product that uses copyrighted materials as part of the product, you may be doing a transfer, a license that's an implied license, because those copyrighted materials are necessarily a part of what the product is, right? In certain areas, you have compulsory licenses. And in the United States, there's a compulsory licensing scheme, for example, for music used in most commercial establishments. So if some bar or restaurant is running a TVs, jukebox, anything like that, there are compulsory licenses for those displays of copyrighted works. And those bars and restaurants have to pay fees based on schedules that a group, a quasi-government group comes up with on a regular multi-year basis, right? You also then have things called Creative Commons or other licenses, which this is something that was developed in connection with what's called the open software movement in particular. And these are licenses that say anybody can use this, but if you do use this, you have to do A, B, and C. For example, you have to give an attribution. You have to allow other people to use your derivative works under the same creative license. And you just have to look and see what those Creative Commons licenses say. And then again, there are certain activities in which you have mandatory public access to some works. And this would be in particular court cases, for example. While the annotations that Westlaw or other legal publishers use, you can't say, oh, you can't look at a court case or a state statute, state code of laws without paying a copyright fee. And there's some litigation that's happening in this area right now. Okay, next slide. Okay, again, the agreement that your assignment of a copyrighted work has to be recorded to be enforceable. The recordation is at the Copyright Office. Now, you do not have to actually record the original copyright for it to be effective. Copyright becomes effective as soon as the work is developed. The moment it comes into existence, the author, whoever that is, has a copyright. However, you can't sue over that copyright, so it's not an enforceable right until you register the copyright. And if you then want to transfer, you have to have a written document that again is recorded at the Copyright Office. All right, it's very important to determine when that work comes into existence and who owns it at the time it comes into existence, because that is very much a matter that could lead to huge litigation. The biggest case about that, all the way to the Supreme Court, most of us know about because it was a hot topic for the years leading up to the Supreme Court decision. And then it caused almost everybody to at least tinker with their intellectual property clauses in their contract. Stanford v. Roche had a situation where Stanford had an intellectual property policy saying that the professors will grant is the term they used, a copyright, transfer the copyright and the patent rights to Stanford. The particular professor signed another agreement with the company that then Roche bought, which is why they're on there. But that consulting agreement, it was actually a non-disclosure agreement and led to a consulting agreement, but it said that the consultant hereby grants all the intellectual property rights to, again, the company that became Roche. All the way up to the Supreme Court, we thought we were going to be talking about Bayh-Dole and who had this right and big important public policy, and the Supreme Court said no, it comes down to the contract language. The drug company said that the consultant hereby granted rights, and therefore the rights, the minute they came into existence, became the drug companies. Stanford said they will grant. That's a term in the future. So it only happens if you have those rights already. And since the Roche language said that the consultant never got any rights, no rights to give to Stanford. So there was the whole Supreme Court case, all having to do with the specific language of assignment. Okay, next slide. Okay, institutional settings. This is the work for hire. In the United States, if you are an employee, your works are automatically owned by your employer. This is not true in all other countries. In the US and Canada, it's almost always the case. For Canada, it is, with incredibly rare exceptions, the case for the United States. This is it works within the scope of your employment. Now, if you're an employee, but at night you're writing the great American novel, that great American novel is not within the scope of your employment, and normally at least, and it would not come under the work for hire doctrine. All right, the court case here that everybody should go back and look at is the Community for Creative Nonviolence versus Reed. Reed was an artist, produced a work on commission for the Community for Creative Nonviolence. And then the question came, who had the right to make reproductions? Those are derivative works. Reed said he did. The CCNV said they did because they commissioned the work. And the court, again, looked to the statute and said, Reed's not an employee. If he's not an employee, it's not a work for hire. And therefore, unless it was in the specific contract that he assigned those rights, he kept them. So next slide. Okay, now, normally, while you don't have to have the work for hire doctrine in writing, in almost all institutions, and as far as I know, every university, it's in writing. It's in, not necessarily in an individual contract, but it's probably in the institutional policies and procedures. It may also be in your individual or your employee manual or your individual contract, okay? Now, non-employees are not covered. That includes consultants, students, all right, volunteers, anybody like that, patients, subjects. None of those people are covered under the work for hire doctrine. So you will need to deal with that in university policies and with individual agreements with those other non-employee persons, all right? There's then, for teachers, there's something called the Teach Act. And I just point that out. It really does not have much to do with the research. So go back and look at that. The Teach Act policies must be in writing. What that does is it protects teachers and broadens out, essentially broadens out fair use policy beyond what would be allowable for non-instructors, all right? Okay. Now, once again, you also have to have a publication policy that's different from your authorship or ownership policy. You need the publications policies because JAMA and NEJM and all the other learned journals say so, and your folks won't be able to get their stuff published without being in compliance with the various publications policies. Next slide. Next slide. Please advance it. There we go. Okay. All right. Getting permission. It becomes a real important then that we go get permission. We want to use other people's copyrighted works. And when I say copyrighted works, even if it's not copyrighted, we'll talk about some of the things that can't be copyrighted, like those databases. You still want to get permission for use. Because there are other ways to protect some of those items. There's a whole list here of ways that you get permission for different kinds of works. It can be difficult for particularly older works. So again, this may not be a big issue if you're in the sciences, but if your folks are doing work in anthropology or sociology or the humanities, one sort or another, and you're dealing with old works, it may be very difficult to find who the owners are. I just happened to note, as in passing, some folks in Oh Brother, Where Art Thou, the movie and the soundtrack. They went back and found the original convict chain gang person who was the author of a song that they used and actually paid him royalties, even though he didn't have the right to. But that was an incredible amount of work to find that person. Next slide. All right, some things that you should be looking at right now, and the first sale doctrine is particularly hot and will continue to be hot. And what is that? When you buy a book, you don't own the copyright, but you own the book. But when we start talking about digital materials, a lot of companies now are saying, oh, we didn't sell you the book, the electronic book, we gave you a license in the book. When Tesla sells their cars, there's a huge amount of software, but they're saying you don't own even the software that is installed in your car. You only have a license to that software, and so we can turn it off, among other things, and they have. So the first sale doctrine is something that you want to do, and it's beyond the basics, but it's something that you want to start looking at in terms of what that means, particularly again with your questionnaires, with some software that you may or may not actually own, you only have a license in, and so forth. The Digital Millennial Copyright Act is a law that is meant to protect copyright holders. It is often being used right now to knock people out of being able to change software again and to make improvements. So this is an area, again, it's beyond the basics, but take a look at some of the issues there. There's a good article on that. And then fair use will always be an issue. Next slide. Okay, now, those of you who may or may not deal in copyright, if you're dealing with the federal government in particular, you're dealing with data, and data is not exactly the same as a copyrighted work. Data is defined in the FAR and the DFARS, and note it is differently defined. So there is information that is data under the FAR software that is not data under the DFARS. What's the DFARS? The Defense FAR Supplement. But this is an area where they actually have a completely different definition of what's data. Next slide. Next slide. Thank you. Okay, so the data clauses, which are mandatory clauses, which means for those of you in the government contract and grant area, they are what are called Christian clauses, and they will be in your contract if they should be in your contract, even if the contracting or grant officer did not put them in. So this is an area, and this again goes way beyond contract in copyright, but it's something that you should go back and take a look at. The Christian doctrine has nothing to do with religion. It has to do with the court case that originally came up with this doctrine. And Christian clauses are in your contract or grant, even if they're not actually there, because they're required by law to be there. In any case, the data clauses are Christian clauses in many cases. And so you will need to know what those clauses say, and they vary by the type of contract. And they deal with different kinds of data depending on whether it's a research contract, a contract that deals with controlled or classified data, and other kinds of issues that arise. So the data issue is, again, beyond the basics here to some extent, but it needs to be covered because most of us are dealing with, whether it's NIH or DOD or Department of Transportation, we're dealing with government contracts and grants every day. Next slide. Okay. In the grants area, again, often you do not see the data clauses as clearly as you do in government contracts, but the requirements of those clauses are in many cases very similar and are implied or included by operation of law again, right? Now, beyond the issue in US government contracts, you need to recognize that you've got the same issues when you go anywhere else around the world. There's a very, very large law firm that does a very nice job, and I probably need to update that site because they do update the handbook. But DLI Piper, the law firm, puts out a data handbook, and I would suggest you take a look at that, depending on which countries you're dealing in. It's also important when you start dealing in data and other intellectual property rights to recognize that the US government and foreign governments often have MOUs or memorandum of understanding that may apply or not apply the intellectual property laws in the United States to foreign grants and contracts. I represent some folks overseas, and one of the first things I had to do was to go see whether or not the Bayh-Dole Act applied to Australian universities. It turns out it does, for at least the ones that I'm dealing with. And so that's a very, very important issue as you start dealing internationally. All right. And then next slide, please. Okay. The last few minutes here, we'll talk about something. Okay, you've got something that can't be copyrighted. For example, a database of a fact compendium of some sort. So since it's facts, it can't be copyrighted. Or an algorithm, again, a mathematical formula, it's what an algorithm is, can't be copyrighted. How do we protect that? And the answer is trade secrets. Now, a lot of universities say, oh, no, we don't deal in trade secrets. Well, yes, you do, all the time. First of all, your information in your proposal, until your proposal is accepted and becomes public, is private. If it's not private, you are running the risk that you are going to lose your intellectual property rights because you made them public. And at least on the patent side, once you've made something public that is inventable, that is patentable, that is in fact the starting point for your patent clock. And you've got it, even though you're the inventor, you've only got 1 year. All right. The trade secret law started out as common law, meaning there was not a statute. However, there is now something called the Uniform Trade Secrets Act in the United States. That is not a federal law. That is a model law that 50 states have passed in one way or another. And so you will need to go to your state law to talk about trade secrets. The federal Protection of Trade Secrets Act has imported some of those things into federal law as well. Okay, what is a trade secret? It's something that by agreement you are keeping secret. That's the basic definition. That's a real general definition. Next slide. Okay, we talked about the Uniform Trade Secrets Act, and again, they have a definition, information that is of some economic value and that you as the owner, the original owner, have tried to maintain it as secret. Okay, next slide. Okay. There is then internationally an organization that covers these issues. That is the World Trade Organization and the World Intellectual Property Organization. So WTO and WIPO, between them, cover intellectual property in terms of multinational laws, treaty, agreement. There are various levels of protection here. So going from a treaty to other multinational agreements to bilateral agreements or agreements within certain areas. So the Europeans have agreements, the Asians have agreements, and so forth. When you start talking international, this gets very complicated, way beyond the basics. So again, I would suggest at that point, get to counsel and get expert advice. And I think we're close to the end. Next slide. Yeah, so I know we only have a few minutes, but obviously I'm perfectly happy to take questions, and I can take them as long as they leave the meeting open. So Jeff, back to you. Okay.
And we have our first question in the chat. What are the hot topics going 5-10 years into the future? 5 to 10 years in the future.
Okay, the very first one, and this is, you're asking me, I'm a big science fiction fan, okay? So I'm going to tell you the very biggest issue is going to be works generated by artificial intelligence entities, whatever those may be, because artificial intelligence, by definition, can now generate works. And in fact, they've generated artworks, they've generated other visual works, short movies so far, and could go beyond that. At which point, who owns that? Is it the people who developed the AI? Or is it the people who ran the AI? Or is it the people who put the inputs into the AI? Or is it some combination of that? So there's and that is, I'm quite serious, that is going to be a major, major issue. Again, transformative works, particularly as we get into what the Facebook people are now, it's Meta, and that's what it's all about. The works developed in the so-called metaverse, and who owns those? The whole concept of NFTs, which is, I can't ever remember what that acronym stands for, but essentially it's restricted transfer digital works. Those of you, any of you who are gamers or anything like that may know, people do tokens and they do avatars, and I'm not a gamer, so I only know this from, again, reading my science fiction books, but who owns those avatars and who can control those, and what about derivative works from those, and so forth. Any of you who are into cosplay know that all those uniforms, so to speak, are derivative. And again, those are all copyrightable works, even though they're in fabric. But lots of art is done in fabric, or the equivalent, plastic or whatever it may be. Similarly, the intersection between patentability and copyright is going to be a continuing big issue, especially as we get into the equivalent of 3D printing in all kinds of products, and even more so the whole development of biological materials through the next step from CRISPR, where you're actually generating a new biological stuff from a series of instructions given to a molecule to develop more stuff. Those instructions, at least arguably, are a copyrightable work. Or are they? Are they facts? Or are they from the non-patentability side? Are they natural activities that can't be patented either? Lots of issues there in that intersection between copyright and patent that are going to be coming. And then the international ownership of particularly, again, those instructional works that lead to the ability to develop new medicines, new products, new social good activities. And especially as we get to the point where you can, again, I use just the real broadly, that whole idea of 3D printing or of generation by a set of instructions given to a machine that then in turn develops a new thing or work or whatever, or some combination of that. That is really going to be a major area for new legal innovations as to ownership. So it's kind of an exciting thing if you're into where this could all be going. So if you got any law school professors, this is something to start writing articles about today. So they are actually. Other questions?
I don't have any other questions in the chat.
Okay. And if you are into this, just Google that